Story 1. Asking a question and then jumping on your phone to text or fiddle while I am answering instantly irritates me. Story 2. I thought about what you said and responded to it. I can tell you are not listening. You are just waiting to say the next thing you thought of. Story 3. I am not sure if it is common, but this happens to me daily. My coworker is the most long-winded person I have ever known. He is smart, good at his job, and I generally enjoy working with him. I must be extremely careful when I ask him a question. I need to be sure I really want the answer, and I have to phrase the question precisely. He can easily take 20 minutes to answer a yes or no question. He provides a relevant background, digressions, anecdotes, reminiscences, and trivia before answering. I am not exaggerating. I have asked questions and he has rambled so long that I forgot what I had asked by the time he finished. It is maddening. Story 4. My husband's family member once asked me a question about my job. We had just met, and as I was responding, he walked away. I'll go with that. Story 5. When I speak, I am met with complete silence. Not even MHM or any acknowledgement. It is especially infuriating when I am answering a question. How hard would it be to acknowledge that you heard me? Story 6. When someone interrupts, there is that awkward dance where both people try to speak at once, and one person simply talks over the other more loudly. That is a red flag for main character syndrome, in my opinion. Story 7. When someone claims I said something I did not, it shows they did not listen. Story 8. I am frustrated when a person cuts me off mid-sentence to interject their thoughts or does not allow a two-way conversation. Story 9. At work, when people do not answer your question but respond with an obtuse answer that dances around what you're trying to find out, it feels like they are keeping the information from you as a weird power move. Story 10. My wife has a bad habit of cutting me off. I often have to tell her that I have something to say and ask her to listen. Once we attended a catering event and my in-laws asked how I was doing. I got 2 words out and they began talking among themselves. Story 11. What really ticks me off in a conversation is when someone plays the one-up game. You share something you're proud of, like landing a new job or achieving a goal, and instead of being happy for you, they immediately start talking about how they did something even better. It is not just dismissive. It feels like they see every interaction as a competition. Another is fake listening. You know when someone nods and says, "Yeah, totally," but their response has nothing to do with what you said? It is not just lazy. It shows they do not respect your time or thoughts. I'd rather they admit they are distracted than fake it. Lastly, I cannot stand when someone turns every conversation into a vent session about their problems. Everyone needs to unload sometimes, but if it is all the time, it becomes draining. At some point, it stops being a conversation and becomes emotional dumping. Story 12. When someone constantly refers to a person as their husband or wife, I have known both of you for 15 years. Just say Sarah. I know you are not talking about a distant cousin or a stranger from the context. Story 13. Abbrev or shorten reg. Words that don't need shortening. Story 14. People ask questions with a preconceived notion and answer for me. An in-law asked me if my husband and I travel. Then their friend, whom I had met once for 5 seconds several years ago, responded for me by saying that we did not look like we travel. I do not know how someone would look like they travel. I have been to 14 countries and 22 cities in the last 4 years, not counting repeated visits to a few countries or cities. Story 15. Whenever you contribute to a conversation with more than 2 people, you can see them lose interest as you speak. Story 16. When people use your name repeatedly in conversation, it always feels weird and gross, as if they are trying to ingratiate themselves with you or manipulate you. Story 17. Coworkers complain about people they dislike, but when I point out that someone they like is not doing a task they are supposed to do, they immediately change the subject. They will complain about someone forgetting something but refuse to acknowledge a friend who is actively avoiding a task. If we are going to have a complaining contest, at least complain fairly. Story 18. Ask a question, then ask a different, unrelated question before I finish answering the first. Okay, the conversation ends and I disengage. I am long retired. I do not have to put up with anything. Story 19. Do not drop names without context. Provide a single sentence description of this person or state your relation to them so I can follow the conversation. Story 20. When people of my parents' white baby boomer generation or demographic feel the need to identify traits of specific people in their stories, for example, the friendly black gentleman at the store, the heavier waitress who served us, or the gay barista, even when those details are irrelevant to the story being recounted. Story 21. Turning into a me monster. Suddenly, everything is about them. Story 22. I am not a native English speaker. Sorry. You know when you were talking to a coworker, classmate, or someone else and that person seems nice, so you say something like, "Hey bro, that's how I refer to everyone. Want to hang out this weekend?" They say, "Yeah, what's the plan?" But then flatly refuse. Your proposal when you say your plan doesn't involve paying for anything. It can be just biking with a friend while talking to get to know them better, or biking early with a bag of food and coffee to have breakfast outside, or even working out together. I have moved out of my country. Those things were normal there. But where I live now, only older people understand me when I explain how much those rejections, not talking about dates, piss me off. People my age here seem to only hang out if there is somewhere to spend money instead of having simple, real fun. Thank God I do not have money to study here anymore, and I am going back in January. Technically, this is bad news for my studies, but for my social life, it is the best news ever. Story 23. I get angry at people who interrupt someone else's story to tell their own. The reason is that I have severe attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. My desire to do the same is probably 10 times more overwhelming, but I stop myself. I force myself to listen and pay active attention when someone else is telling a story. I repeat to myself that this is not about me. I will listen and let the other person finish without telling my related story. It frustrates me when neurotypical people cannot do that. Story 24. Someone who will not let you get a word in when they know you have a comment about what is being discussed. I am not referring to interrupting. I mean a two-way conversation instead of one person talking at you. Story 25. When are you having kids? I don't know if you really want to know how often I get cream-pied. Story 26. My brother-in-law and I were talking casually about something mundane. I can't remember exactly, but I said as a figure of speech, and it was obvious. He cut me off and said I don't actually with such arrogance. It was one of the most awkward endings to a conversation I've had in a while. Story 27. When someone is fully focused on themselves and doesn't bother to listen, only responding with a quick cool, and continuing to babble about themselves, it is frustrating. I always make an effort to listen and respond with genuine interest. People are interesting and have different lives and stories. I wish more people were less self-focused. You can really learn from others. Story 28. When you talk about something traumatic that happened to you and they just say it is sad and move on, is that all they have to say? It is even more upsetting if I had helped them with something traumatic. A lack of empathy on a two-way street is agonizing. Story 29. I work with a supervisor who asks me a question and, as I formulate and begin to answer, interrupts and gives his own response. I just stare at him. I have tossed my hat and safety glasses a few times. It goes in one ear and out the other. If the questions were simple yes or no questions, it would be easier to give a quick answer and avoid the whole situation. The questions are not simple, and I often have to consider several mitigating conditions to provide a clear, proper response. This is extremely frustrating. My crew, all senior technicians who are experienced and organized, have picked up on my anger and mimic him when they are feeling froggy, in jest of course, but it gets my blood boiling just the same. Story 30. Somebody subtly forcing me to ask a question feels like low-grade manipulation, and I am really averse to it. For example, you will not believe who I saw at the grocery store. Some people do this all the time, and it drives me up the wall. Story 31. When someone interrupts to finish what they think you are going to say, it is especially aggravating when they are wrong. It is equally annoying when a person changes the subject before you have a chance to reply, leaving you to decide whether to return to the previous topic or accept the new one. It is worse when they incorrectly finish your sentence and then move on before you can correct them. Story 32. Maintaining sustained eye contact makes the conversation more stressful than it needs to be. Story 33. They say yup and aha repeatedly and do not pay attention to the conversation. They just want to hear themselves talk. Story 34. I once knew a shopkeeper who would ask after you, try to guess what you would say, move her mouth as you spoke, and often say the last words at the same time as I did. It was very frustrating. Story 35. Over-explaining happens in certain situations, especially at work. If there is time to talk, fine, but so often I will ask someone, where do you need this to go? And get a 10-minute explanation of what it does, how they got it, and why they need it. Great, but where does it go? Story 36. Having a conversation with someone in person while they constantly scroll through their phone. Story 37. I don't like it when people keep talking while I already comprehend what they're saying, even mid-sentence. I get it. It's not their fault. It's my problem, but it still makes me irrationally disturbed. I also do something that annoys people. I use the word wormst instead of where. Unbeknownst to them, wormst is contextual and requires place, reason, and time. Story 38. When I am asked for the 150th time whether I am going home for Christmas or other holidays, I am home. I have lived here for over 10 years. Visiting family is different. I am an adult and I take regular vacations elsewhere. Story 39. My wife does this sometimes. I will be talking and she will do other things instead of listening. I stop speaking and refuse to finish what I am saying. Story 40. Lying. People are so casual about it. I know you are not doing great every time I see you, and you do not actually want to get together sometime. Just stop. Story 41. Sharing traumatic experiences unprompted, especially when we do not know each other well, does not make you seem special or interesting. It makes me concerned for both of our safety. Story 42. This happens all the time. There is not much you can do. They do not see the problem. They are only interested in speaking and in contradicting or correcting you. If they only contradict or correct you, you can have a bit of fun. I have done this. Subtly change your opinion to the polar opposite and watch them change theirs to correct you. Story 43. Not stopping when someone interrupts you is, in my opinion, just as rude as interrupting someone else. This is especially true when the interruption is for a reason. Dad, can you hear me? Story 44. They cut me off and then get mad when I try to finish my sentence. Story 45. When people announce personal information with no segue, it is jarring. I would prefer that people stop revealing such details, but I will accept it if they work it into a conversation naturally. However, someone walking up to you and stating that their father used to hit them with no introduction or greeting is unacceptable. Please stop. Story 46. When someone starts a sentence with the words no offense but, you just know the offense is packed and ready for delivery. Story 47. The political probe. People who immediately try to determine where you stand on the political or religious spectrum, such as asking who I voted for. Voting is secret for a reason, and it is rude to ask people how they voted. Story 48. People who get touchy and invade your personal space while you are just trying to have a conversation. When they laugh, it feels like they are spitting in your face. Story 49. If someone has one of their AirPods in their ear while talking to me, it really annoys me, and I try to avoid the conversation as much as possible. Story 50. Listening to a conversation and then realizing that you processed none of it. Story 51. Phrasing statements as questions. I'm sure it's a kind of microaggression because your brain attempts to answer the question rather than address the observation. For example, who saved that file in that folder? Instead of, I found the file. Asking who did it makes people feel guilty and need to justify the file location, even if it is the correct place or they did not do it. Or, why is there water leaking all over the floor? Instead of, let's stop the leak. It turns every situation into an inquisition. Story 52. You can see a person's eyes glaze over when they stop listening and begin thinking about what they will say next, usually trying to top your story. Story 53. When people pause in a conversation to allow others to speak, they immediately interrupt you 3 seconds after you begin speaking. Story 54. For me, in both heated and friendly conversations, if you refuse to concede any points, I will assume you are close-minded and stubborn. Story 55. Being interrupted takes the cake, apparently. I have work to do. I do not do it to be rude. I listen intently and am excited to connect, like the donkey from Shrek. I can appreciate that most people do not see it that way. Someone mentioned it might be a cultural thing, and I wonder if my cultural background is a factor. Story 56. When someone monopolizes the conversation and does not allow it to be two-sided. Story 57. Assholes ask for advice. You give it, they tell you you are wrong, and then they do what they intended to do anyway. They are not seeking advice. They want confirmation that their idea is the right way. Story 58. When they do not listen and are just waiting for their turn to speak. Story 59. 99% of the conversations I have on a daily basis are one-sided. Others do not ask me any questions. The people I have worked with for over 6 years know almost nothing about me. Story 60. A woman I work with talks over me when I'm halfway through a sentence. It drives me crazy. Story 61. It happens when someone thinks they know what I am about to say and tries to complete the statement or extrapolate, but they are way off base. There is a strong overlap between people who do this and people who interrupt. I have been guilty of this, but it annoys me so much that I try hard not to do it anymore. It takes just a few seconds of listening to let the other person finish their thoughts. You can use that time to form a thoughtful response. Story 62. No yapping. Excessive swearing. Use actual words, you nincompoop. Story 63. When you tell someone about something that happened to you or something you felt or thought, and they tell you it didn't happen. Bonus points if they personally witnessed it and previously acknowledged that it occurred but have now changed their mind. Story 64. When I share my thoughts, an interesting news story, or an anecdote to start a discussion, but the other person disregards everything I said and replies with a completely unrelated comment, it irritates me and makes me feel unheard, especially in a group setting. Story 65. Introduce political topics into conversations that are unrelated. Story 66. You interrupt me. When I try to tell a story or say anything, you immediately start talking about something you just thought of and feel compelled to say before you forget it. Story 67. Please do not offer unsolicited political opinions. I do not care that you do not like our Prime Minister, especially when it is the first time I am meeting you or when I am asking how you are. Story 68. One-uppers and one-downers always present as either much more than you or much less. If you say you are busy and tired, they are always way busier and way more tired. I do not mind as much when someone interrupts or talks over me if I know them, because I know they do. Not mean to be annoying. They are just being themselves. I am used to redirecting the conversation back to the original subject after they finish their sidetrack. I think many people I know probably have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or are kind of neurodivergent. Story 69. They want to know everything about my chronic health condition, and then the conversation ends. Furthermore, I am not defined solely by my multiple sclerosis. I lead a life that is far more interesting. Story 70. As someone with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and autism, I can speak for many of the people described in these complaints. Most of us know we are this way, we do not like it, and we are as frustrated with ourselves as you are with us. In fact, we will be upset about it longer than you will. Pro tip, just tell us. Say you are talking a little too much, or say I was not finished, or say you interrupted me while I was talking. Our minds are racing at 100 miles per hour and we do not realize we are doing it in the moment. Story 71. The fact that they do not understand things and I have to explain my point of view makes me feel like I am back to square one, not in a conversation but in an argument. Story 72. People who talk over me, then say, "Oh, sorry, you go ahead," only to interrupt me 2 seconds later are infuriating. My sister-in-law is notorious for this, and family dinners have become an exercise in patience. Story 73. People who brag that they have done something you are proud of, saying they did it better, faster, or spent more on it. Story 74. My friends get really annoyed at me when I use anywho to unironically move the conversation forward. I do not see the issue. Story 75. Talk for 10 minutes straight, then cut me off 10 seconds into a sentence. I want to punch them in the face. I am old and cranky, though. Story 76. There's a difference between listening and waiting to talk. Story 77. When someone asks you a question and then starts talking to someone else. Story 78. Using your phone while I am talking to you is very rude. Story 79. Start a conversation by telling me you are from Texas. Story 80. Do not be insincere. I can tell if you do not care. Just do not ask and move along. Story 81. When someone adds right to the end of every point they make, it comes off as condescending, but in reality it is because they are not sure they are explaining things clearly. It is very annoying. Story 82. If they bring up past conversations in which I did something wrong and keep reminding me about it. Story 83. Avoid informing type monologues before you ask anything about the person you are informing. This is commonly known as mansplaining. While men are the worst offenders, women over 30 do it too. I also like sharing facts. But if you are going to be proud of explaining that South Korea is a tropical country, take a moment to listen when someone says they went to South Korea and it was snowing, and believe them. In my culture, we do not communicate. We monologue about how much better we know things. Story 84. Don't interrupt me when I'm answering a question you asked. Why the fuck did you ask if you can't wait for the answer, mother? Story 85. Loud, nervous laughs freak me out. Nodding quickly and saying, yes, I got it, when you know they do not is off-putting, especially during training at work. Story 86. When you first see someone, many conversations start with, hey, how are you or how is it going? I know it is odd, but many people use these phrases without caring about the answer. They immediately follow up with another question or comment and do not give you time to respond. If you do respond, they often brush you off because they expect a brief not bad or a witty comeback. Story 87. Cutting me off and trying to talk over me, along with constant sniffing. Just blow your nose. Story 88. Avoid phrases such as due to the simple fact that, and as I mentioned earlier. Story 89. Can I ask you a question? You already did. Ask the fucking question. Story 90. Yes. MMHM. Ah, okay. Really? Nice. Story 91. I can't deal with people who feel the need to pop and smack their gum during a conversation. The sounds send me over the edge. I just get so angry and can't explain why. Story 92. My words are often dismissed as if I am not important enough to speak. Story 93. Disagreeing in a way that implies the other person is inferior or foolish for having a different opinion, and making demeaning jokes when speaking to someone you barely know. Story 94. If we are in person, just look at your phone. I will shift to answer only mode pretty quickly. Story 95. When someone looks offended while you are talking to them. Story 96. I was once on a project to implement a new computer system at the company where I worked. A team of consultants was drafted in to facilitate the work. One consultant in particular would ask about a process and, before I was half a sentence into my answer, switched to a completely unrelated question. I wondered whether they wanted me to explain it or not. Story 97. Interrupting is the worst. The worst version for me is being asked a question and then interrupted within the first or second sentence of my answer. If I wanted that job before, you can be sure I do not anymore. Great job. Story 98. Do not interrupt, check your phone, or fail to pay attention to what I am trying to say. Story 99. Assuming they know what I am trying to say before I have finished saying it. Story 100. Cut me off mid-sentence and I'm calling you out, ignorant fuck. Especially if you've interrupted what I was doing to ask a question I was already answering. Story 101. I have often had people ask me a question only to interrupt me with what they think I am going to say or to answer their own question. Story 102. Do not match their energy when they ignore or shut down your joke or comment. Story 103. Interrupting people before they finish a thought is common. We all do it, but some people interrupt constantly, and it drives me insane. Story 104. I hate it when you make an effort to talk to a coworker or someone, share something general about your life, and they don't respond. They just sit in silence. Feels like doing stand-up for a bad audience. I'm not going to perform for you, George. It is worse when immediately afterward another person arrives, mentions something equally mundane, and suddenly a full conversation breaks out. Story 105. When I am talking and someone says who asked, it happens to me a lot these days. Story 106. Tell me about yourself. No, that is rude. That is lazy. Please use a real conversation starter. Story 107. I work with a colleague who interrupts people to repeat what he said no more than a minute earlier. He has no social awareness and does not pick up social cues. He is very obnoxious, and I hate when he is in the office. I can hear him in meetings with his clients through the wall, and he talks right over them. It is frustrating. Story 108. Using basically or essentially repeatedly fills me with anger. Thanks for the conversation. Story 109. Boundary-busting intrusions during the first 2 minutes of an introduction. In short, this is routine life in my neighborhood. Rude, nonetheless. Story 110. Grab your phone and start looking at messages or scrolling your timeline right in front of you. Story 111. When you barely know someone and they give you unsolicited advice about weight, skincare, hair loss, or your job. Story 112. I am a member of a governing board. I express concerns to a managing supervisor about an employee based on reports from multiple sources. I was dismissed mid-conversation, which had not been hostile, by the supervisor, who immediately made excuses for the employee. I responded with defensive excuses when questioned. Story 113. I currently live in Ireland. People here frequently cut me off in the middle of a sentence, and I feel I have to be more assertive in conversation. Story 114. Adults who expect you to guess their news or who start a conversation with the words "guess what" and then wait for you to guess before they will share the information. Laughing out loud. Stop. It is weird and controlling. Say it or do not say it. Story 115. Causing you to repeat the question even though you already said it clearly the first time. Story 116. Appears to be nodding in response but is not actually listening. Story 117. I have a coworker who asks me a question, interrupts me, talks over me, and then does the exact opposite of what I was trying to say. What was the purpose of asking me? Story 118. They ignore what you say, interrupt you, and turn every remark into something about themselves. Story 119. You ask me what I do instead of asking my name first. Yes, I have a job. No, it is not my entire personality. Story 120. When someone asks me how I am, before I can reply, they ask another question. Story 121. People who say like all the time annoy me. I work with a woman who says like, okay when she speaks, and I hate it. Story 122. I know it is a common attention deficit hyperactivity disorder thing, so I try not to be too judgmental. If I am mid-sentence and you interrupt, that instantly angers me because it tells me you are not listening or do not care what I have to say. It does not matter if we are strangers, but when friends do this, I genuinely believe that all 3 of my friends with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder do not know anything about me or do not care. Story 123. They rapidly fire questions, then go off on a tangent in the same breath, never giving you a chance to answer. 5 minutes later, they circle back to the original questions and finally give you a chance to respond, only to ask the same questions a third time because they did not listen. Story 124. When people rely too heavily on pronouns in stories, I have no idea who said what to whom, why she is upset, or how they are doing after that one person came back into the picture. Madness. Story 125. It's hard to explain, but lately it has been driving me crazy when someone asks me a question or for advice. I put time and effort into a thoughtful response, and they are already checked out, thinking about what they will ultimately decide to do on their own. They say, yeah, I think I'm just going to. Fine, so you didn't need my opinion. Next time, skip asking. You'll do what you want, and I won't be upset. Win-win. Story 126. People who constantly ask questions about what was just said. Story 127. Any type of small talk is so tedious and awkward that I literally want to punch the wall if I am in that situation. Story 128. Interrupting and not leaving space while speaking prevent a real conversation. Story 129. It may sound ridiculous, but I hate when people say please and thanks. The point of saying please is that you are asking someone to do something. Saying thanks assumes they will do it. Story 130. If they start smoking or blowing smoke in my general area, I'm gone. Story 131. Being told I am uninformed is upsetting. I am on a constant quest to better inform myself. Story 132. I hate when people do not give you a chance to reply. The worst conversations are when someone speaks, you try to respond, and they keep talking. It is also frustrating in a group when you try to answer and someone else talks at the same time. Then the first person thinks you interrupted them. Conversations are hard to navigate. Story 133. They put their own spin on what I say, even when I say exactly what I mean, and they sometimes severely misinterpret it. For example, I will say I do not want seconds of dinner, and they will take it to mean I barely made it through the first plate because it was so bad. Huh? Story 134. When someone interrupts to correct or disagree, and says no repeatedly before launching into a counterargument, please calm down. I would understand if you said no once. You already interrupted me. Story 135. When someone in a group says they are having a party on Friday but does not explicitly invite others, half the information is missing. I will not understand that I have been invited unless people say you are invited to my party or are you coming to my party. It angers me when people leave out important details, and I feel left out because I did not understand. Story 136. When someone repeatedly says like or speaks for too long. Story 137. When I politely and sincerely end a conversation by telling someone to have a good day and they respond with okay, well, fuck me, I guess. Story 138. If this happens with every person you converse with, there is something wrong with you. If it happens every time with a single person, try to speak more clearly to them. Never be judgmental during a conversation. Story 139. When we are talking and he or she says, hey, can I tell you something? I say, okay. Then he or she says, never mind. Why do you do that? Story 140. When people mouth what others are saying while they are speaking. Story 141. I prefer not to start conversations with people. Story 142. When you do not complete a thought or sentence, it is confusing. The constant jumping around makes it hard to follow. I understand that sometimes thoughts are forming as you are speaking, but after a while I get lost. Avoid irrelevant details. If something is not germane to the story, move on. For example, Mom and Dad, what toppings you had on the pizza the night of the house fire is not the important part. Story 143. Interrupting and not letting the other person finish a thought or sentence. Story 144. I focus on the purpose of the conversation and what I need to determine to avoid repeating the same discussion. As a hospital administrator during the pandemic, I had to speak frequently with people I otherwise would not interact with. In those situations, verbal barbs directed at me must not register emotionally. I speak with them to gather information I can use to establish a clear path to optimal care for the patient treated at my facility. It is a mental technique. If you are in a bind with family or in public, externalize your role as if you were on a stage. This requires some self-preparation in advance to understand your character and motivation in that setting. That way, if you find yourself in the situation, you can default to your role's parameters as a framework to prevent others from taking advantage of your vulnerability or acting contrary to your convictions. Story 145. Don't ask me trick questions. I was testing to see if you would say something, and now I know your true intentions. Fuck off and just ask me. Story 146. Fake chuckles, excessive head nodding, and too much eye contact. I'm not making eye contact with you because you're just not a threat to me, so don't fucking stare at me. Brad. Story 147. When they come off like they're trying to reel you into an argument, I don't feel like being angry. For God's sake, please leave me alone if you're going to start a verbal fight. Story 148. When people ask how you are just as a gateway to talk about themselves, it's frustrating. I had an old friend like that, and eventually I stopped talking to him because of it. Every time he messaged me, he would ask how I was. But the moment I replied, he barely acknowledged what I said and launched into long monologues about himself. He was the same in person, and I have a family member who does this too. Just don't bother asking me. Go straight into the monologue. Story 149. How is the weather? There is a window. Look out of it, you absolute tool. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.